welcome back to another episode of MindMatters Perspectives. This season aims at bringing you stories and experiences from people from different parts of the world with different walks of life, sharing their stories, sharing their tales, and hopefully, in this process of us sharing with one another, we come to realize that we aren't alone and that we all have our own journeys, and when we share them with one another, we create a space of inclusivity, and we know that there's someone out there that understands what we're going through. There's someone out there who's gone through something similar, and it validates us and it validates our experience. So that's the aim, and in that hopes, we begin. Trigger warning before you get into the episode. The discussions that take place are quite intense. We move into discussions of depression, anxiety, issues related to the LGBTQI community. It varies from various topics, so please do take care. Again, these discussions are not any form of professional help. It is just a sharing platform. So again, if you need professional help, please do seek it. I'm pretty excited about today's episode. I've got a very dear friend of mine, and just like a disclaimer. I mean, if you hear a couple of nicknames in between, that's just we go way back. We go way back. I think it's kind of an understatement to say we go way back. We've probably known each other for close to maybe almost 20 years, I guess, which now makes me feel kind of old when I say it out loud.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, so Niv, please introduce yourself, your name, pronouns, and what you're doing for our listeners.
Hi, my name is Nivedita. My friends call me Nivi. It's the most common nickname I have. Sneha and I do go way back. We were in the same elementary school together. We also ended up in the same school for 10 years after that, after elementary school. I identify as a cisgender female. I go by the pronouns she and her. I'm currently a psychology major, and I'm pursuing a concentration in sociology and anthropology because I'm interested in people. I like to think of myself as a mental health advocate. So I'm very excited by the projects that Sneha has undertaken, and I'm really excited that I get to be a part of one of them.
It's my honor that you're here, really. So, could you give us a little glimpse on your journey with living with anxiety?
Yeah. Actually, when I was thinking about my journey, I find it sometimes very difficult to point out where exactly all of it started. I know that I struggled with my mental health right from middle school, actually. I had some difficult experiences. I had turbulent peer relationships. I always was battling a sense of loneliness at the time. But I suppose it was less potent because it didn't really manifest in a way that impacted me or my surroundings or my academics or anything. But in high school, I started to see the beginning of a pretty steep decline. I started to write a lot. I really enjoy writing. I would write poetry and prose. But for some reason, everything that I wrote had pretty dark themes to it. Themes that I suppose one would not necessarily engage with in their teen years. At the time, I didn't really identify that as being problematic. The people who read them thought that it was the work of active imagination, not that I was particularly struggling with anything. But I think even though I was struggling with some dark moods at the time, I was also very worried about having people feel the need to support me, and also being as academically motivated as I can be. I didn't want my experiences to impede on what I wanted to do in the future. I think I'm slightly, almost too much sometimes career motivated. And I saw my moods and my distress as more coming in the way than as being experiences that I should have validated myself. It was actually, I think, when I moved to college that I started to crack a little bit more. The academic pressure was obviously higher than ever, and this whole environment that I was in was completely new. It was unfamiliar, and I was scared. And it was really hard that I was now suddenly expected to navigate the world on my own. I think my first year at college was completely fine. I think in the balance of fear and excitement, I was more excited, and so I didn't really feel overwhelmed. In my second year, I started to experience pretty severe panic attacks. I was constantly anxious. I engaged in serious self-doubt. And despite my best attempts, my academics started to get affected. I was more prone to breakdowns. It was very easy for me to fall into a spiral of overthinking. And it eventually got worse and worse. I could no longer hide it. It became fairly obvious to the people around me that I was struggling. And I think at the time I realized that I needed help. And I eventually met a psychiatrist who indicated that I might have an anxiety disorder and that I needed therapy. And I did seek therapy. But I think I'd created a really dark place for myself with the struggles that I was facing. And I refused to acknowledge that I needed to move out of this dark place. And so I was very resistant in the beginning to therapy. Something that I think that it was a learning point for me was I terminated therapy prematurely after a few months. And I strongly recommend against this because like for many others who terminate therapy prematurely, the aftermath is often much worse than when you came into therapy in the first place. I began to experience after that, and this is into my third year of college, what my therapist later described as moderately serious depressive episodes. And that was incredibly hard too. I mean, my journey of healing and getting out of that place that I was in has been hard, but I received a great amount of support from the people around me. I received a great amount of help from mental health practitioners in my life, and I think I am where I am now because of that support. But yeah, that's like a quick run through of my journey with mental health.
I mean, I keep like, you know, when you share like bits of your stories, like I can feel that I can resonate with a couple of those moments. Like when you talk about not wanting it to affect your academics as hard as you try. I mean, it's not a choice that we have to feel these things, and sometimes it's just so overwhelming in our head, and you try so hard to keep it at bay, but when no matter what you do, it kind of takes over at times. Yeah.
I think sometimes, and the biggest learning for me through this process, and obviously I feel like I was very lucky that I've always been interested in understanding human behavior, and I've always been interested in helping people. And so I obviously drifted into an area of psychology that really looks into that. I know that my education has helped me gain some kind of insight. So I'm able to say today that possibly the first mistake that I probably made was to not validate my own experiences. And I think that's something that's so important. But I let myself stew in the distress because I didn't want to acknowledge it. And eventually it got bigger than I could have managed, and I needed help. So yeah, I think it is very important to seek help when you feel like you need it.
You know what, Niv, that thing you mentioned about not validating your experience, I just want to say, like, just the fact that you're coming on now and sharing your story, you're breaking that cycle for so many people. Like, if those that hear your story now, if they resonate with even 1% of what you're saying, it's validating their experience. So they're automatically going to acknowledge that they're not insane, that there's nothing wrong with what they're feeling, and it will motivate them to seek help. And that's the entire point of having like people share stories. So thank you so much for bringing that up.
No, I mean, thank you for having me. I think I'm also someone who believes that it's important to talk about these kind of things because the experience of of any mental health concern or even a subclinical concern, even if you're just stressed, can sometimes feel so isolating. But having conversations about it, hearing other people's stories, I think is very important. I'm really happy to share mine and be a part of your series. So yeah.
So you mentioned about going through having these kind of moments and like episodes in high school and university. So could you share a little more about, in detail about like how exactly did you manage to like navigate those kind of emotions and those episodes, especially when you're in like stressful environments like high school and university? I'm sure it would be helpful to a lot of people.
So I think the anxiety that I had was obviously not conducive to coping. The self-doubt and overthinking obviously made it hard for me to navigate life the way I wanted to. I think, unfortunately, I think in the beginning, I didn't really have any positive coping mechanisms. My coping mechanism has often been to distract myself. And so I remember in high school, the way that I would cope is to not really have any free time. And so I would occupy all of the time that I have in a day to an extracurricular activity, if not something related to academics. And I mean, in college, I think I continued to participate in more extracurricular activities than was good for my well-being. But I also started to throw myself into work a lot more. And I think the rationale behind that was that if I'm doing something that I'm passionate about or doing something that I like and enjoy, it means that I'll feel better. But of course, not giving yourself the space to think about what you're going through and your experiences is not any better for you at all. And I think I was always pretty dissatisfied despite being able to do the things that I did. I would involuntarily sometimes sign up for things that, may not necessarily bring me any kind of joy. And the aim was often to always just distract myself, I think. Eventually, obviously, my frustration started to seep into the things that I was doing, and I started to not enjoy a lot of the work that I was doing. Honestly, it becomes a cycle, I think. But working in order to distract yourself is not a very good coping mechanism at all. I think it took some time for me to figure out ways in which that I can take care of myself without it impacting me or exacerbating what I was already experiencing mental health-wise. And I found some positive coping mechanisms. I think one of the big ones has been writing. I really enjoy writing. I have for a very long time. I think it's a great way to be able to pen down what you're feeling, to introspect. I think journaling is a beautiful coping mechanism. I also like to sing. Sometimes I don't know. I'm sure there's some science behind this, but if I'm feeling sad and I listen to a few sad songs, I get it out of my system. And that feels great.
100%. I think the power of art when it comes to mental health is so underrated. And I really do hope to like delve more into this like with the upcoming series that I have planned. But that thing you mentioned about the distraction, this is something I could relate to 100%. So since you personally know me, you've known me for years, and I don't like to sit still. I will take 100 things at a go if I have to, just to keep my mind from sort of like thinking about certain things. And I would keep myself busy constantly. And so in 2019, when I ended up getting my knee injured, I ended up being bedridden for almost 8 months or so. So I physically could not move anywhere, and I could not take up any extra work as such. And everything that I used to avoid, and like I used distraction as a coping mechanism for quite a long time. So in those 8 months when I was forced to sit still, everything that I had avoided and sort of like used any possible thing to distract myself, it sort of like snowballed into one huge ball, and just like there was an avalanche on me and everything just hit at one go. And that kind of sent me into another level of another episode and another spiral on its own. And I completely agree with you. This is coping, like there are so many different ways to cope, and I would like journaling is brilliant, writing is a great outlet, but distraction, I don't think I would ever I just cannot advocate for distraction. Not after what I had to like deal with my head after. So I could completely relate when you mentioned
Yeah.
the distraction thing.
Yeah, I think there's this idea that if you don't see it or if you don't think about it, it doesn't exist. Sometimes there's this idea that we have that if we don't acknowledge an experience, or if we say that we haven't seen something or we haven't felt something, it somehow helps us become stronger. And but I think my philosophy is that when you fail to acknowledge that you've experienced something, or you're practicing the whole if I don't see it, maybe it's not there, you're practicing something like that, you're saving that experience, and the emotions that are attached to it, the distress that's attached to it, saving it for later. Because eventually there will be a time, as human beings, we experience adversities. And eventually there's going to be where all of the emotions that you've attached to it start to build up. And then obviously you'll have to express it somehow. And it becomes worse the longer you put it off, I think. So distraction, definitely not an advocate for distraction.
For sure. All right. So you mentioned that you're a psychology major. So could you like kind of give us a little light about how your own experience with mental health kind of affected your career choice? Because not a lot of people who don't know Nivi personally won't know this, but she wasn't always for psychology. She actually was very much in preparation to become a doctor.
I think for the longest time, I knew that I wanted to be that I could help other people in some way or the other. I remember the earliest aspiration that I had, I think, was to be an engineer. And I wanted to be able to create programs that could help people in meaningful ways. Eventually, in high school, I think I discovered my love for biology, and I tried to marry that to my desire to help people. And I thought medicine is like the answer. I did an internship, I think, with a doctor. I got to see the processes that govern practice of medicine, and I realized that seeing people in physical pain was not really my cup of tea. And also there was something that seemed more profound in the experience of something or a pain that you can't see. I mean, apart from my interest in helping people since forever, I also always have been interested in understanding human behavior. And so when I went to Ashoka, I think the first thing that I did was explore psychology. And that was the answer. At the time, I knew that at least in my ability to want to understand people, that the answer was psychology. And I eventually found more about mental health. And I think at the time I wasn't able to identify, but I knew that certain parts of what I was studying resonated with me. In my second year, as I explained, was when my mental health had seriously declined. A lot of what I was reading was, or a lot of what I had read was things that I was experiencing. And it was almost a tussle at the time to see, to differentiate between whether I was imagining these things that are happening to me, or whether this was reality. And I think the biggest struggle, I suppose, is that, wanting to be a clinical or counseling psychologist, thinking about what it would mean if I had a mental health concern, what that would mean for my profession, whether I would be able to support other people if I myself require support. And I think that's a battle that I carried for a very long time. I was very down about it as well. And I think eventually I had a conversation with someone, and they gave me an example that I think was very important. They said, even if you consider a physical illness, so someone basically told me that if you were to visit a doctor for a physical pain that you were experiencing, and the doctor had experienced physical pain themselves, even a doctor who's coming from a space of, having understood the theory behind what you're facing, and being able to imagine where your head is at, will definitely be able to help you. But having had similar experiences, I think, fosters a much deeper and meaningful sense of empathy.
Very true.
And I think that inspired me. Sorry?
No, I agreed with you. I agreed with you.
Oh, okay. Uh, no, and I think that basically inspired me even more. I think to be able to take up the track that I did. I do want to be able to support people who've experienced mental health related issues, because I myself have experienced mental health related issues. And I know initially I did think that my mental health would impede my career choices, but in more ways than one, it has actually helped to reinforce this idea that I'm where I am meant to be.
No, but honestly, after knowing you for 20 years, I can without a doubt say that your passion to help people is something that has always and always like shined through from you, like from for as long as I can remember of knowing you. And not only that, I mean, with you, when it comes to helping people, it's not something like it's not like just a thought or like a passing this one. It's something that comes from within you, and you have so much passion to it. I just know that you're going to do great things, and I'm so glad that you mentioned a battle in your head about if you could do it or not, and I'm glad you had that battle and where you've landed on it in the end, because without a doubt I know you're going to do great things.
Oh man, that's so sweet of you. I'm also excited to see what things will look like in the future. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know what? As a psychology student and literally on the verge of becoming a psychologist in that field, how would you sort of like recommend therapy? Because I think when you hear it from someone who's done it, who's studying for it, it'll definitely, there's a lot more credibility to it. I mean, that's one word to it. So could you share a little more about that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I want to be able to practice this thing that I depend on as well, in a way. And again, like this was the source of my conflict. I remember bringing this up with therapists that I worked with, that I feel so weird that I'm speaking to someone who has a role that I intend to take up at some point in the future. But I think, especially from my experience with therapy, I absolutely 100% recommend therapy for anyone who's even just thinking about it. And I think there are a lot of misconceptions that one attaches to therapy. And that shouldn't really come as a surprise, because there's already so much stigma that one has attached to this idea of mental health. But I think there's this idea that therapy is about getting a diagnosis. I think there's a lot of power in being able to confide in someone about the problems that you're experiencing, and being able to feel understood, being able to get insight about your experiences, being able to receive empathy and compassion that you're facing, try to take care of some of these issues on your own, and it is okay for you to ask for help. Obviously, for me, I had this idea that I would be able to shoulder all of my issues on my own, and it turned out to be not really the case, and in fact, that made things a lot worse than they did better. And being able to reach out for help and being able to lean on someone made a lot of difference. So if you feel to a professional about some struggles that you're facing, I'd say go for it. And I think some people often say that they're not ready to talk to a therapist yet, and I think that's completely fine too. Talk to someone. I think that's very important. You should ideally have a conversation with someone you care about, someone you trust, someone you can confide in, who can give you the love that you need and deserve. If you're not ready to speak to a therapist, there are also these group of people called peer counselors. Peer counselors are trained professionals. Not professionals per se. They're individuals who are interested in supporting people with mental health, who don't necessarily have the training or licensure of a mental health professional, but still are able to actively listen to what it is that you're saying in a space that is still confidential and compassionate. I have been trained as a peer counselor and more so a peer supporter. And I've worked in this platform called 7 Cups as a listener. And I mean, the whole process is simply being able to sign up and be assigned to someone who is willing to listen to you and just be able to speak about your problems, and a listener would compassionately lead you through or talk to you through all of the issues that you're possibly facing. Even that is impactful. But I think therapy is not something that you view as affirming that you have a problem. Therapy is a space for you to talk about what you're struggling with. And there's honestly nothing wrong with talking about an issue that you're facing, I think. And it's just a safe space. And I think that needs to be acknowledged. But yeah, that's my view.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know where this kind of thought was established that asking for help for some reason makes you weak, which I will never understand. Honestly, acknowledging that you need an extra hand is probably one of the strongest things, according to me, in a person's character. And if we could just start thinking like that, I feel like the concept of therapy, the stigma around it, would drastically reduce. I mean, and again, you're so right about the misconception about it. You don't always have to go for a diagnosis. I mean, and if you really think about it, we have no sort of conversation or information about it in general. Like, actually, I was going to ask you about this also, like the concept of education in these kind of matters. We don't really know much about anything. Like, if you were to ask a kid, what do you do if you have a fever or a cold, they will have an answer. But if you ask them, okay, you're feeling low constantly all the time, what do you do? They'll probably be like, I don't know. What should I do?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, there are a few things, right? The first is that mental health literacy in general is something that's still coming about in India. I think we haven't really gotten to a place where everyone is as well versed with the idea of mental health and therapy. What we do conceive as being mental health, for the most part, is the most severe mental health related issues. Things like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. These are what we would classify as mental health related issues. The media hasn't really helped in the interpretation of what it means to have these experiences. Often, possibly without any ill intention, the portrayal of mental health is often poor. Obviously, that feeds into these misconceptions that one has about mental health. And obviously, education plays a huge role because there are so many aspects of education that are important. Maybe we'll come to that when you ask me the question. But I think one has to acknowledge that first of all, amongst the circle of therapists and counselors that I know, one of the major reasons that one usually approaches a therapist for support is sometimes as simple as personal growth. In just being able to understand yourself, you're able to grow in ways that you possibly wouldn't be able to on your own, because you're able to gain insight about your behaviors. You're able to be more in touch with your emotions. You don't have to have an issue if you're coming into therapy, especially a big issue or an idea that you need a diagnosis. None of these are reasons why you have to come into therapy. So I honestly believe that, especially in the scenario that we're in, where conversations about mental health are not as conducive as they should be, it's so brave that people are able to say, yeah, I need help. Those people, I think, it's incredibly brave that you're saying, that you're acknowledging that you need some kind of help in an environment where that might not be seen as conducive by the people around you. I think it's very, very important that you acknowledge and validate your experiences. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you're right, the representation of it on mainstream media or whatever it is, I mean, of course it's they don't do it intentionally, but at the same time, like the concept of it is so romanticized. It's sort of like we don't have the uncomfortable conversations and like the honest portrayals of it, because it does set people off. But at the same time, when you sugarcoat it and sort of like give this make-believe version, it does more harm than good, because you tend to start thinking, okay, this is what it should look like. And when it isn't anything like that, that sort of like messes with your head again. Like, this is something we were talking about just some time back. Like, representation does matter, and it matters a lot. And an accurate representation does wonders.
It's actually interesting to see mental health and often mental health disorders that are portrayed in movies were initially, I think, for the most part, either severely dramatized for to pull in audiences, or they were the comedic punchline somewhere, a mental health related issue.
Very true.
And I think as there was an increase in discourse about mental health and an awareness that there is misinterpretation, we've somehow almost ended up in a place where, as you said, it's more romanticized now, to the point where everyone asks the question, do I have a mental health related issue, or identifies with some grossly generalized symptom that is portrayed in a TV show and says, yeah, I have that. So that means that I have this diagnosis. I think it's very hard in general for the media to portray a very realistic idea of what mental health related issues look like. Because I mean, at least I believe to a certain extent that doesn't get the views,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the most authentic version of it would set people off. I mean, these are these uncomfortable parts of life that people just don't want to acknowledge that they exist. And I think at this time true. It's so important we remember life is both beautiful and horrible at the same time. It's just a reality. You will not see a single human being that has always been having a good day. Okay, maybe the levels of good and bad might vary from person to person. How it affects a person, it'll be different. But the reality is life is ups and downs, and expecting to live only the good, it's sort of, you're not living life. I mean, that's something I've come to learn. So it's you've got to, you can't have light without darkness, as cliched as it sounds.
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect way to say it. And I also think that, I mean, in light of us having delved into mental health and media for no reason whatsoever, but I also think it's important, even if, and to be fair, I have seen some films that have taken the step in the right direction in terms of portraying mental health related issues. It's not that it doesn't exist. But I also feel like it's important as viewers and people who consume this type of media for us to be aware that one person's experience need not translate for you. There is a spectrum of mental health related issues that we know of right now. And no two people experience a mental health related issue the same way.
Absolutely. Our brains are just wired different. So, and it's just how it is.
Yeah.
Everyone's got their own story.
You as a person.
Yeah.
Exactly. You as a person is very different from the person next to you. And you as a person has also experienced very different experiences from the person next to you. So just because you see something on the screen doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have the same experiences for you to have, you feel like you have a problem. It all comes back to being able to introspect and if you feel uncomfortable, acknowledging that you feel uncomfortable and asking for the right kind of support in that situation.
Absolutely. I actually just love that we just segued into mental health in media representation. I mean, I think that's one of the this is what I want. These conversations, this is how it takes place, and I'm just really enjoying this conversation. I really am. Okay, so you did mention.
Me too.
Yes. Yes. Niv also is a mental health advocate, and she also is. And she's got some projects of her own in the works that I'm extremely excited about. And I was hoping that maybe you could tell us a little about that, your inspiration, what your goal is, and also how we can help and amplify your voice in your work. Because very frankly, together we can create conversation. And that's the ultimate goal. And anything we can do to help, please do let us know.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the projects that I've had that is long running and I had to put on pause because my personal life started to get a lot more hectic was this Instagram page that I run called These Voices in My Head. And it started off with, I suppose, a very similar motivation to this podcast, which is to be able to share stories about one's mental health experiences and share that that there is suffering, but there is a solution eventually. You are able to find a sense of peace eventually, and that you're not alone in your struggles, you know. So I try to bring on people who've had experiences with mental health concerns and who are willing to share them, and I feature them on my page. And I've also started, the most recent post that I've had, which is, by the way, pretty old now, because I've not been able to use that page as often as I would like, but I will be soon, is just being able to take care of yourself. I think sometimes we neglect self-care. And I think, again, this comes back to not taking care of yourself now means that you'll have to take care of yourself later. And taking care of yourself for something that may be a lot bigger than it needed to be because you didn't acknowledge that you needed the time and space in the present, like right now. So I think self-care is very important. So sharing tips about self-care, things about mental health that everyone should know, basic psychoeducation, that's the aim of that page. The other project that is upcoming that I've just started working on is a podcast called the Catharsis Initiative. The idea is purely psychoeducation. It is to have conversations with people who are experts in the field of mental health, to talk about different things, the different themes in the area of mental health that I think are very important. For example, mental health and the pandemic, because God knows that this pandemic has been detrimental to a lot of people's mental health, irrespective of whether that's something as simple as stress related to work, or something as serious as not being able to have had space because you're stuck at home for long periods of time, to issues like mental health and your parents, because having conversations about mental health with your parents is slightly complicated, in the sense that, at least from personal experience, sometimes it feels like they're not able to acknowledge your experiences. And it's easy to say that comes from a place of ill intent, but honestly, it's a place of a lack of knowledge. And so being able to navigate conversations about mental health with your family, and being able to take care of yourself, all of these are topics that I intend to cover in that podcast. But yeah, these are the two major projects that I have in mind right now. There are some ideas that I have for things that I might do later on, but I'm currently obviously in the academic grind as well. So balancing anything more than these two things right now is going to be hectic. But yeah, these are the two things that I'm
really excited because I truly believe that these things that you're doing, it'll start the conversation, it'll start impacting a few, and that will just spread.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of transmission I am here for. Not for the COVID transmission, obviously, but this kind of knowledge can spread. And that was my attempt at making a joke. And I'm not going to be doing that anymore. I apologize to everyone.
No, I think
that was bad.
No, I think that was a decent joke. I think in light of the things that we're talking about, we needed some kind of humor. But to be fair, also everything that you've been doing so far is also along the same lines of increasing knowledge. I think it's very important to be informed about these kind of things, especially in terms of not shrugging off mental health as something that's imaginary, which is something from personal experience I have seen happening. Even if you don't refer to something as mental health, if someone is in distress, you need to acknowledge that they're in distress and help them through it. So, I hope that having more conversations increases some kind of awareness. And I hope to be able to do that on different platforms.
Absolutely. You know what? Just building on that, we're going to circle back onto how important education is in these kind of matters. And you can go ahead and give me a little more on that.
I actually have, I think, 3 things that I think are very important when it comes to education about mental health, why education is important. And I think the first one that's possibly slightly underrated is language that you use when you describe mental health, or in general, the lingo that we use in the day-to-day. Because I think it's very important that you remain respectful of people's experiences. If you haven't yourself experienced something that you are using colloquially in your everyday language, you're neglecting that this person has actually gone through a lot because of this diagnosis that you're trivializing. I know that I've been guilty of this, but simple things like saying that you wanting to keep your room clean is OCD, or you feeling sad on a particular day means that you are depressed. I think in a way it really demeans the experience of what it is to actually face depression or actually have a diagnosis of OCD, because it's very, very hard. Also, this idea that people convey that someone is depressed, that A is depressed, instead of saying something as that's more respectful, ideally, which is A has a diagnosis of depression. I think simple things like that, there is a certain amount of education and reading up that you have to do to be able to be informed about the language that surrounds mental health. I think the second thing that's very important and is often neglected is learning how to support the people around you. There's a statistic that is debated still, that 1 in 4 people have a mental health related issue. And irrespective of how true that is, there are people who are going through issues around you in general. And you need to be able to have not only a ear to listen, but also a shoulder for them to lean on. Because I think being able to talk to someone is in itself such a place of solace for someone who is facing some kind of emotional distress. I know that I benefited a lot from being able to have long conversations with people about my experiences. And in some ways, it supplemented the care that I got through therapy, which I think is very important. So learning how you can be helpful in someone else's journey of healing is something that education really helps with. And I think the third thing is that in understanding mental health experiences, you learn a lot about yourself. There is so much self-insight that you can get in, even if you don't relate to all of the experiences that are described in mental health language. There's still a lot that you can learn about yourself, about the people around you, about the environment that you're surrounded in, about challenging these conceptions that society holds, whether they're really true or not, thinking about them critically. All of that comes from being able to educate yourself about mental health. So I mean, for me, I think these are 3 very basic things that education about mental health can help with.
Basic, but extremely important. Like that foundation that you have laid out, wonderful. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Especially when you mentioned about like not knowing how to react to like someone who's going. So this is something that I personally ended up going through. Like, obviously everyone who's possibly listened to this podcast knows about this because I've talked about it in quite detail. So I lost my brother when I was 16 years old, and I wasn't able to process what was going on. And at the same time, there were a lot of people trying to be there for me, but at the same time, they had no idea how to. So it ended up doing, at times it was a little more harm than good, but obviously with the best of intentions. But I think that's, again, it kind of like sort of circles back into the fact that we don't know how to react to these conversations. We don't know what to say to these kind of things. And there's no actual sort of guide that's kind of there that sort of like lists out, okay, you know what, if they go through so and so and so, this is what you say. But making an attempt and like for kind of acknowledging the fact that, okay, we don't know, we need to figure this out, so we got to talk about it more, we got to understand more. I think that's step 1 right there.
Yeah. And also supporting a friend or a family member who's experiencing any level of distress is not overly complicated. You don't have to have had intensive training to be able to do that. It's as simple as being willing to listen and being willing to empathize with someone's experiences. Even if you haven't been through the same thing, to say that I hear you, I hear what you're going through, I acknowledge that this must be hard for you, is so powerful. And it goes a long way for someone who's going through difficulties or personal challenges. So I think, just being there for someone is so important. I can't even put into words how important it was for me. I know it's important for other people as well. So yeah, it's important to be able to learn how to support the people around you for sure.
You're right, and it's just like you said. I mean, living with any sort of mental illness, it's such an isolating feeling on its own, and just having that one person, at least one person around, like sort of calming you down, not even calming you down, just acknowledging that there is something going on. It makes a world of a difference.
Yeah, no, for sure, absolutely.
All right, Niv. So we're pretty much done with the interview. I mean, all I have to ask now is, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave for the listeners? Any words or advice or any questions you have for me or anyone out there? Just please, you have the floor.
I mean, I think I brought this up quite a few times now in the course of this interview, but I'm going to hit on the same point again because I think it's so important, is to talk to people. As much as you feel like it is in your best interest to bottle up what you are feeling, I can assure you that only builds up, because you're not going to have one adverse event in your life. There is going to be several challenges that you have to face. And to be prepared for each of those, you need to be able to be in touch with your feelings and be in a good headspace. And that means being able to have healthy conversations with the people around you, to acknowledge that you're feeling a certain way, or if you need to get the kind of support that you would need to be able to overcome that. But talking to people about what you're going through is very important. And in that sense, understanding that as much as your experience is your own, there are other people who face similar experiences. So it's not that you are in some way in the wrong for feeling the way that you feel. And I think the second thing that I wanted to talk about is find positive ways to cope. This is definitely not a substitute for care or for talking to people, but there are definitely, in fact, some scientifically proven ways in which you can actually take care of yourself on the day-to-day. I know that I've started to enjoy journaling a lot. I've always enjoyed writing. Being able to freely write whatever is coming to my mind gives me a sense of clarity that I possibly wouldn't have if I went to sleep with all of my jumbled thoughts in my head. It really helps to be able to pen down what I feel. Some people like to play the drums. Some people like to listen to music. Everyone has an activity that they enjoy that helps them in some ways vent what they're feeling in a meaningful way. Finding that positive coping mechanism, a way to ground yourself, I think is very important to just general well-being. And remember that you're not alone. I think that's also very important, that you remember that what you are experiencing is a product of your circumstances. If you're feeling a certain way, don't let someone else tell you that you're not supposed to feel that way. Don't let society tell you that you're not allowed to feel this way because you haven't been in a situation adverse enough to feel that way, the way that you feel. I think so many times people try to control our own narratives, and that's possibly the most detrimental thing to one's well-being. So I'd say, if you're feeling a certain way, you're allowed to feel that way. You are valid in feeling the way that you feel. But don't stew on that. If you feel a certain way, try to find a way to overcome it in whatever small way you can. So whether that's trying to cope with it a little bit by yourself, trying to reach out to a friend, a peer counselor, or a therapist. Find a way to find the light at the end of the tunnel. But you're definitely not alone in your experiences. I think that's important to remember. But yeah, that's all I have.
And I think that is the absolute perfect way to end. That is just spot on. I mean, you're ending it with kind of a sense of positivity, a little hope, and also a little education. I mean, there really isn't a better combo. So thank you so much.
I'm glad.
Thank you so much for coming on for this interview. And I am so
Thank you for
excited.
having me.
Of course, I am so excited about all your future projects that are going to come about, and I am waiting, and I really cannot wait to see what's going to come out of it because I just know you're going to do such good things.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Sneha.
And that was Mind Matters Perspectives. Tune back next week for another episode. Thank you. Love and light to all.